Hello everybody, welcome to Cars, etc., etc. It is a show about cars, etc., etc. And it's proudly brought to you by altcointrader.co.za. Go there, register for free, and you can find out all about cryptocurrency and all of those wonderful things. Today is a marque, I must say, very, very close to my heart. They are always recognizable when they're on the roads. They have such prestige about them. They have had a bit of a checkered career during their tenure. But when you see one on the road, you know exactly what it is. And that, of course, is Jaguar. Oh, I love Jaguars. Joining me is a man who knows everything about Jaguar, Roger Martin. Roger, great to see you again.
Thanks, Sasha. Thanks very much for the invite. It has been a while.
It's been a minute. I had all of these questions, and then you arrived in this magnificent Xk-120. And all of us, you know, Jaco, Fritz, myself, we just went, oh, just look at that car. I mean, it is over 50, maybe 60 years old, but it looks that it could fit like today. That's the beauty of Jaguar.
Yeah, no, that is correct. I mean, Jaguar, was started by William Lyons, who's later got a knighthood, Sir William Lyons. He was a stylist. So, he started off business 1922, taking sidecars and basically...
100 years. It's 100 years.
It's 100 years if you take it from him. The name at the time wasn't Jaguar, it was SS, which standard for Swallow's sidecars.
Okay.
And then after, when he started making cars, before the war, they were SS cars, and they had like a model which would be Jaguar. But then, of course, for the connotations in the Second World War for SS, they wanted to have a neutral name, so they became Jaguar and Jaguar cars.
Now, tell us a little bit about the car that you arrived in. I mean, it's just so beautiful to look at, but from there, if you look at the design of that car, it's amazing what evolved thereof.
Yes, so this was the Jaguar Xk-120. You would say, well, why did they have numbers like 120, went on to 140, went on to a 150? That was the top speed that they were meant to get. So it was good for 120 miles an hour. You've got to understand, in those days, that Xk-120 came out just after the Second World War, and it was the fastest production sports car in the world.
It's 120 miles. Yeah. That's what it says it could go.
Yes.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yes. And then, of course, when he launched it, the press were all taken with the fantastic looking and such a stylish looking car. And then they wanted to see if his claim of 120 miles an hour was true, because motor manufacturers were forever making claims that couldn't be obtained. So they took the car to Belgium, where they had some nice flat roads and closed off a highway. Just took off the windscreen and put in these small aero screens that you can see were like fitted to the SS90 and SS100 cars from the 30s. And they got a top speed of 132.6 miles an hour average in two directions. So that was just absolutely unbelievable.
That's 70 years ago.
It's actually longer, because they launched in 1948. So we're probably looking about 72 years.
That's quite incredible, that kind of speed. The one thing you did tell me about it, they weren't great on the brakes, though.
No, that was the biggest problem.
So you could get to 136 or 132 miles an hour, but you needed another 2 kilometers to slow down.
Yes, and probably a parachute as well. That was the big problem. So they took the car, they went to Le Mans. They had private entries that went in the Xk-120s, but they then developed the C-type Jaguar, which went on to win Le Mans at least twice. The brakes were an issue. They tried bigger and bigger brakes than that.
Yeah.
They then came up with the idea of putting disc brakes on. So Jaguar actually was the first car company to purposely make disc brakes for motor cars. Disc brakes had been invented because they had been used in the aircraft industry, but they were small little things, not anything to stop cars.
Yeah. That's incredible. So if we look at the racing history, because that's sort of where we are, the C-type, and then of course the D-type, which is most probably one of the most magnificent racing cars that have ever graced the earth.
Yes. No, the D types were absolutely amazing. I mean, what they also pioneered there is they pioneered monocoque design, because the Xk-120, when you look at the chassis, it's like a bus chassis.
Yes.
It's a huge chassis. The C-type used a similar chassis and that,
Yeah.
but when the D-types, they made a monocoque design. They also had employed aerodynamicists, and he came from the aircraft industry. So
That's why it's so
basically, I
sleek.
think it's before the days where they had wind tunnels and did all of that type of testing, but he had good ideas on the aerodynamics from the aircraft.
Because I mean, it was just such a revolutionary car. You know, it came out and everyone went, wow, I mean, how's this going to work? And boy, did it work.
Yes, no, it was. I mean, I suppose that's why they got such a good reputation, and also value for money. You must remember, their cars were probably a third of the price of Ferraris that were made in much lower numbers. And they had similar performance, and certainly Aston Martin. When it came to Le Mans, there were these fights between Jaguar and Aston Martin. I mean, Aston Martin won in '59. And so, they were on a par. But Aston Martin was 3 times the price of what a Jaguar would be. Yeah.
Okay, so I mean, that's a little bit of the racing heritage. But let's go back to the cars. And I mean, you're going back roughly 100 odd years, even though it wasn't known as Jaguar. And it all started off with this, the SS90, the SS1100s. There wasn't the Jaguar
mascot. Yeah, with the leaping, yes.
at this stage. But tell us a little bit about these specific cars, the SS90, the SS 100. I mean,
yes,
that was the start of it.
That was pre-war. I mean, but the SS90 came out first. It wasn't such a big hit. It was meant to be good for 90 miles an hour. It had a smaller engine in it. Then they came out in around about 1935 with the SS100, which was just before the war. So it was good for 100 miles an hour. They made it in a 2.5 litre and a 3.5 litre. But again, it was the styling that made it so popular. But then it was also quite successful in rallying and hill climbs, and people used them, privateers, as basically entering events with them.
I mean, it's quite fascinating when you look at a car like that and you go, yeah, let's take it on a hill climb. You'd be bonkers today, but I suppose that's what was available in those days.
It is. I mean, I have the utmost respect for somebody like Sir Sterling Moss that's passed away now. I mean, he used to race the Jaguars as well.
Exactly.
He also drove, I couldn't imagine having to drive a Xk-120 in a 24-hour race, because I find it stressful from the braking point of view, just driving it on the roads here. But the biggest issue is the brakes, as you say. Yeah. But then you leave big gaps. But you know what the Joburg drivers are like. Everybody kicks in to fill the gap, not realizing that you can't stop like they can.
That's true. That's true. But I think most people they're just trying to race to catch up to you to get a look at it. I think that's the way. It's amazing that you brought up back in the 40s, 50s, or whatever. Jaguar was a lot cheaper than Aston Martin and Ferrari. For example. But as I grew up, there were people whose parents drove a Mercedes-Benz or a BMW. But if somebody drove a Jaguar, it was more expensive than the BMW, than the Mercedes-Benz, than the Audis of those days. Why were they? Was it just they were below other marques, but they were above sort of the European marques? Was it something British?
No, I mean, if you look at it, I mean, it always depends on markets. I mean, for example, we talked a little bit about Alphas off the show. Yeah. I mean, but in the UK, Alpha Spider, like a 69, the roundback Spiders, cost more than E-types. Yeah, but part of the reasoning was the one part of the EU, there were import duties on cars and that, but still, I mean, there are different markets. But the Jaguar cars, I mean, they always had a engine which was probably more performance orientated. Okay. If I look at my first car was a 180 Mercedes, the 61, and if I compare that car, which was a 1.8 litre, with say a Mark II, they came out with the 3.4 and 3.8 litres. It's like chalk and cheese.
Correct.
I mean, the performance is just so much better, and it's actually so much more of an enjoyable car. With overdrive as well. Overdrives were like fifth gear.
Fifth
but
gear,
overdrive
yeah.
was an expensive thing to make.
That's sure. Now that makes a lot of sense, and I also just remembered in sort of the late 70s, early 80s, and we'll go back as well. But they had 2 petrol tanks,
Yes.
and it was always just something, the Jaguar, got to fill up both of the petrol tanks. Was it a necessity, or was it a marketing idea, or I mean, it just seemed to work.
No, it worked, but it was all part of the design of the car. Because, I mean, if you look with those 2 petrol tanks, they go out on the side.
Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, they've got the 2 tanks. They could have easily linked the 2 and just had them all filled from one filler cap.
Yeah.
In fact, the old Aston Martin Lagonda's got 2 tanks, but only one filler cap. So they can join them. So they could have done it, but I think they just kept it as a marketing ploy, or maybe it was easier. You drive until the one runs out, and then you've got another one that you can go on.
And always just beautifully finished. I used to get confused though, Roger, when I also used to drive around and say, oh, there's a Jag, and then have a Daimler on the back of it.
Yes.
And I just go, hold on, Daimler, Mercedes-Benz.
Yeah.
This is a Jaguar. What is Jaguar Daimler?
It is very confusing. I mean, you had the Daimler Motor Company,
Yes.
which was an independent company.
Which has
had their own
nothing to
cars.
do with Mercedes.
Nothing at all. They were
Okay.
part of the BSA group in the UK,
okay.
BSA Motorcycles, BSA Arms, Light Arms. So they basically, in this 1960, they sold it off to Jaguar. Jaguar didn't produce the cars at all for long, not at all, probably months. Then they first made like a Daimler, but in the Mark II body, but they fitted it with a different engine. They fitted it with a V8 engine.
Okay.
But then, since then, I mean, the Jaguar and Daimler are basically 100% identical, except for they changed the grille, so it had that wavy-shaped grille.
That's right.
And it was meant to be a little bit more upmarket, so it was the top of the range.
Yes, the Daimler Sovereign and...
Yes, so for example, I've got a more modern one. It's a Daimler 1999 model, which is basically the Super V8. The story goes, it was brought out here for the Queen for when she came to the Commonwealth Conference in Durban in 1999.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that is a Daimler, and it was never brought here as a car because it's got very long wheelbase. You're meant to be chauffeur-driven. And one of the interesting points is that you, as the passenger that sits opposite the driver, you set the leg space from the front seat. So all the buttons to adjust the front seat forward and backwards on the back for you, not if they happen to be a passenger.
Oh, that's just a brilliant story. I want to talk about them under Ford, but we'll get to that in a short while. When I look around and you travel around and you see there are a lot of classic and even vintage Jaguars. Are there still quite a lot in South Africa, or have they, as with a lot of other marques, unfortunately found other pastures?
No, there's still a lot in South Africa. And I mean, I think part of that is, Jaguar was assembled here in South Africa, down in Blackheath in Cape Town at the time. So you had the locally assembled Mark IIs, and then went on to the Xj6s. And I mean, they certainly are a lot lying around. I mean, the difficulty is cost of restoration. So like, for example, the Xj6s, I think they're going to come up, especially the 4.2 manual with overdrive. That is a lovely car. So, but the cost of restoration is heavy. So people tend to look at it and say, what am I going to sell it for at the end when I'm finished with?
Now, that's the thing. So, I mean, when it comes to the cost factor, finding an old Jag, as you say, there are quite a lot of them around.
Yeah.
You must probably pay market-related value for it, for an okayish kind of car. Roger, to now go and restore it to get it into sort of concourse condition like your Xk-120.
Yeah.
How expensive is it? I know the exchange rate is not favorable, but are there parts? Are there interchangeable parts? If you're not looking to go 100% original, so let's take concourse out.
Okay. Yeah, well, the parts are readily available. One thing I can say about Jaguar, I mean, the parts are easy to come by.
Okay.
A lot in the UK, but one of the difficulties that one has now is that in the old days, probably 25 years ago, they were all made in the UK as well. Now you've got so many companies in the UK that have contracted it out to China, and they make these parts for them, and they sell them under names that sound so British, like Coventry Parts or something like that.
And all made in China.
Then you have a problem when the stuff arrives, and little things. For example, I had it on the Mark II. When the badge arrives, the new Mark II and the Jaguar badge, the little pins where it goes through into the boot, they don't line up. So you have these difficulties all the time.
Okay. So someone didn't send the stencil properly.
Yes.
But parts are available.
Readily available, yeah.
Which is, I mean, that's always great to know, because I think a lot of people who maybe are looking to get into like classic cars and maybe restoration, they think, oh, Jaguar, British, 20-1 exchange rate's going to be a disaster. But if you do search around and join clubs and meet, fellow-minded people, you can put these things together reasonably.
Certainly, yeah, you definitely can. I mean, it's a matter, you have to do it yourself. Don't think that you're going to buy a car and get somebody to do it for you and then be able to sell it at a profit. You'll have to hold it for at least 10 years and hope that the values go up. But if you do all the work yourself and you're just getting the parts, it's not too much of a problem. I should have clarified that. It's easy to get the parts for the post-war ones. But if you start looking at like the SS100s that we talked about earlier, that's a different kettle of fish. They're very difficult.
Difficult, and then more than likely you're going to have to get it manufactured.
Very difficult. I mean,
like
yeah, when you need things, for example, you need things like the original gauges, rev counters and speedometers and that. I mean, you basically have to look on eBay and hope that somebody's advertised it. There is stuff like that.
But isn't that also the wonderful thing of how the world has changed when it comes to this openness? If you think 30 years ago, you've got a project and you now are phoning a friend, sending a fax, waiting 2 weeks to see if they've got a part. Now, you just go eBay, Xk-120 indicator, and you never know what you could find.
Exactly. That's very true. And they specialize companies in the UK that are quite reputable. It's like anything. You've got to be careful who you buy from, that you're not going to be taken.
Now, going back to what you've got, Xk-120, there was the 140, there was the 150. I must be honest, I think that's the first one I've ever seen in South Africa. So I don't know how many there are. Are there a few?
Yes, there are. There are others. And I mean, what I've brought here is the 120 Roadster. They then made also like a fixed head, which they put like a bubble on top.
Yeah.
I know probably two of those. I would say on Xk-120s, the Roadsters, they're probably around about 4 or 5.
Still in the country?
Yeah.
Most probably all in pretty decent nick, one would
Yeah,
hope.
they have been restored.
Okay.
They have. I mean, people restore them. I mean, a lot of people put the wire wheels on. I've left mine originals.
Yeah. A car like that, what's the sort of demand? I mean, do you get people, whether locally or internationally, sitting and saying, or somebody saying, hey, Roger, I've got a guy in the UK who's desperate for a 120. He's seen yours. Are you willing to sell it?
No, not really. You have the dealers here that know and they phone you up, but it's not really private individuals that come up. Obviously, if you go to a filling station and you put in petrol, then people will go, oh, it's such a way, I'd like to buy it sort of thing. But no, I wouldn't say you.
Okay. Now, when I sit there and look at Mark 5, Mark 8, and I always look at those kind of Jaguars, and I look at Rolls-Royce.
Yes.
And there's not a lot of difference between the two. Well, did they have like a battle between them, or was it was it the British way at that time?
I think he looked more at Bentley, because you had Bentley and Rolls, but he sort of mentioned that he felt he could give you the same as what Bentley would give you, but at a much better price, because that was always his big thing was how good prices they were. I mean, even like the E-Type Jaguars, when they came in 1961 at the Geneva Motor Show, it was just over £2,000, and nobody could believe that you could get a car for that performance for £2,000.
And styling.
And styling.
And
I mean,
styling.
the equivalent in Aston Martin might have been a DB5, but you would be paying £5,000 plus for it.
And you wouldn't want to go around the corner in a DB5 either, let's be honest. Let's stay on E-Type because it is one of the most recognizable cars in the world.
Yes.
And I get astonished sometimes to sit there and see the prices that some of these E-Types sell for. When I consider that thousands of these were made. It wasn't, well, there's a batch of 1,000. There were like 50, 60,000 E-Types made. And yet the pricing still seems to yearly just escalate.
Yeah, I know. It's a very interesting thing when I look at the prices of motor cars and the classics. I think the E-Type has really escalated in price so much because it's like people of my generation. In the 60s, the Beatles were there. The E-Types were I think the Beatles even owned the E-Types, or some of the members did. And it was like the hip car. And now that we're older, we could never afford them when we were youngsters. We looked at these things. And because the price of E-Types has shot up over the last 10 years, far more than even the older Jags, like, say, the Xk-120s, 40s, 50s, and even things like the SS100s, which are really rare. I mean, SS100 in a 3.5 litre, they only made 141 of them. Wow. So those are small numbers compared to if you take the total production run with all the E-Types. Yes, it was in that realm. But the value of them also varies drastically according to what model. The most sought after is the 3.8 early E-Types, which we call a flat floor E-Type.
Oh, right. Okay. Tell us sort of the difference.
That would be worth probably around about 10 million rand. Because it's they were the first ones were again more handmade. They basically had a flat floor on it. It was lighter. It was actually the best performing, even though it only had the 3.8. It outperformed the Series 3, which had the V12 engine in it. Because now the V12 was much heavier.
Correct.
And they made it more bulky over the years, I suppose. It was a much nicer car to drive because of all the torque.
Yeah.
But when you take the early E-Types, the Series 1 3.8s, they're not that many.
Okay, and that's the one you want.
You want to have a Series 1, and you recognize the Series 1 because it's got the closed-in headlights. It's got like the
so sort of like the Alpha
When
Spider,
they went to the Series 2, then they went
the
to the open headlights.
Oh, so now I know. Now I'll be able to tell. If I go to a Jaguar show, I'll be able to see which is a Mark 1 and a Mark 2. I learned so much in these shows, Roger. It's fabulous. One of my favorite movies of all time is a movie called With Nail and I. And it had a South African actor, Richard E. Grant. And in one of the scenes, he had to get back to London, and he was on the highway in this Jaguar. I think it was an MK Mark 1, a Mark 1. And you just saw this, just bulky but rounded, beautiful car, pushing it down, I think, in the M25 with these spoked wheels. Yeah. And he just sat there, and his friend woke up and said, "What are you doing?" And he says, "I'm making time." And I just, and I just love that Mark 1, the Mark 2s, the design of them. They're just so, they do not date. Would it be fair to say something like that?
I would say so. They don't date. I mean, they're amazing motor cars because, the performance even today is good. And you must remember, the Mark IIs came out. They were the first saloon car that came around with disc brakes on all four wheels. So now it was the opposite extreme to the 120. In fact, if you look on the Mark II on the back bumper, they've got a little red warning triangle with the letters disc brakes. They're trying to tell everybody, don't follow too close because this Mark II is going to outbrake you now with the disc brakes all around. Yeah.
How popular are they in the sense of collectors? Because
they are very popular. A lot have left the country to go into the UK.
Okay.
The UK, they're very popular, and it clothes in cars. You even got companies there that are remaking them with all the modern stuff on them. But they're lovely cars. The only thing I could say with the South African-made ones, they never had power steering. So they got big steering wheels. But the performance is unbelievable. The first one I bought, I was still a student down in Durban,
Yeah.
and about 1977, and I paid 200 Rand for it.
That's
And I drove it up to Johannesburg, and going up Van Rieenen, I still will just remember this so clearly. There was a Mercedes 350, which was the
Merc car, yeah.
And this old 200 Rand Mark II with its 3.8 litre engine, it just required flipping out of overdrive, and it went. So I really like them, and most people, a lot of people like them a lot as well.
And I'm just seeing that they are getting more and more popular. You know, people are just sitting and going, I can get this beautiful 60s looking car, you know, 60s, 70s car with the luxury that it had there, but also the comfort. And as you say, you know, disc brakes. Are the prices escalating?
Prices have gone up a lot, but I still think it's the one car that's good value in South Africa, because I mean the prices probably for around about 350 to 400,000. You could get a good one, which they've done a lot of work on.
That's not. That's really not bad.
Yeah, it won't be Concourse, but it'll be a good drivable car that you could drive every day.
I mean, it is. It's one of those cars. You know, if you had that kind of money and spare money and you take it on a weekend, people are going to stop and say, wow. And they'll immediately recognize that it's a Jaguar. You know, that's the beautiful thing about it.
It is.
Jags are just distinguishable.
Yeah,
Beautifully
that is
distinguishable.
It is a beautiful car.
Let's go a little bit more modern. We've done E-Type, the XJS.
Yeah, the XJS, you know, when it was launched, it was very controversial.
Yes.
Everybody was so disappointed with the styling and the looking of it. But having said all that, it ended up being the longest running Jaguar sports car ever. I don't know if that's because of all the change of ownerships over the company over that time. They still are lovely cars to drive. I mean, they had you could get them with the 3.6 or the V12.
V12, yeah.
We had the V12. It was a beautiful car. It really was a nice touring car. It was completely different to what an E-Type was. But in some ways, they were forced to go that way because of the safety regulations. They couldn't just improve on the E-Type because it would never pass all the American safety regulations.
So now we get to the ownership under Ford.
Yes.
And with Americans, as we know, certain cars can't even go into that country because they're too fast. My personal opinion, when Ford owned Jaguar, somehow Jaguar just disappeared.
Yes, in some ways, and in some ways not. I mean, I think Jaguar, they were in a rough place because they didn't have the capital. I mean, under Margaret Thatcher, they went and they split them as a privately owned entity. There was the guy who took it over, Egan. He actually, with the little money he had, he really did try and push the brand. I mean, going back to Le Mans, and you remember in the 90s, they won Le Mans again. I mean, that was, he decided was the best way. The silk cut Jag. Yes.
It was magnificent.
Yeah, so, I mean, I think the biggest mistake Ford made was when they decided that they were going to now go in and make a smaller model like the X-Type. I think they were looking at BMW and they said, BMW's got a 3 Series, a 5 Series, and a 7 Series. We here at Jaguar, what have we got? We've got the XJ, which is like the 7 Series, and then we don't have really much smaller.
Yeah.
And they went and Ford made the X-Type, and they used all Ford Mondeo chassis parts. And in America, it was a big flop because the Americans were saying, but why must I go and buy a Jaguar? It's so much more. We'll buy a Ford Mondeo. So that's where I think they went astray.
Yes.
But in some of the other cars that came out under their time, like the XK, the XK8 was quite a nice looking car. Yeah. This was a good selling car. And then they probably came out just after Ford had sold them, but they would have been in the design process. I mean, when you take the XKRs and those 2010s, those are fantastic motorcycles.
Beautiful, but more in the sports car realm as opposed to so when they went that X-Type, like trying to take on the BMW, 3 Series or the Merc C-Class or whatever. I just sat there and went, "Where's Jaguar?" With my 2 fuel tanks and that kind of stuff. So and now we change. Now, right from the beginning, what you mentioned to me, I've now worked this out, the Xj12, because that's 220 miles an hour.
Yes, that's quite correct, yeah.
what a genius I am.
Yeah.
And I mean, that is just one of the most sought after supercars of all time.
Yes.
And a testament to engineering. I mean, when that car came out, it was the same as, in my opinion, when Bugatti Veyron came out. There was nothing close to that Xj12
Yeah.
And I mean, that must be incredibly sought after.
No, that is an extremely sought after car. I mean, the average price in pounds is about £480,000 if you can find one. But what was interesting is that, I mean, Jaguar came back after winning Le Mans with the still cuts, and then the guy Egan at the time decided, well, they're going to do like Ferrari do sort of thing. Let's make a limited numbers cars. And originally it was planned to have the V12 engine, but they then ended up by going for a V6 twin turbo. But they were so late with it. And it was also, they were going to make that limited number, and you could have the booking, so you had to book your car and pay a small deposit. Then it was the time there was like an economic slump. So a lot of the cars, and the guys ended up by forfeiting their deposits and not taking them.
Incredible, eh?
But today, I mean, they are so sought after. I don't think one ever came to South Africa.
No, unfortunately, I don't think so. Looking at the luxury saloons of the 80s and 90s, a lot of that, the Mondeo kind of stuff, Xj6, Xj12, those kind of brands, are they sort of collectible?
Yeah, they are. I mean, it's on the Xj12, it's a beautiful car, and then they also made what they called the Xj12 Coupe, which was a two-door Xj6. With it didn't have any pillars for around the window frames, yes. And had the V12 engine. I mean, beautiful car. Also, I suppose cost of restoration is quite heavy, but I think they are beginning to move now and go up. The Xj6s and those are going, and even on the sports car side, the Xk8, which was made in the 90s. People are tipping and saying that is the next car that's going to be a real collectible.
Real collector.
Yeah.
Now we look at today under the ownership, I think, Tata.
Yeah.
And incredible what has come and where they are going. If I sit there and go, the F-Type, the F-Pace, the E-Pace, the I-Pace, mainly all sort of SUV besides the F-Type, which is the real sports car. Are they in a good position with Tata?
Look, Tata has put a lot of money in, and I think Tata's made some very sound decisions. The first was not to move all the manufacture to India and to keep it as a British marque. There is questions, I mean, how long they will carry on pumping money in, because they've been investing a lot. I mean, these electric cars that they've come up with, they are basically banking on that as being their future, because they're saying Europe is all going to go to electric cars. So, I mean, even in racing, they've gone into racing in that series with the electric cars.
Correct.
So, time will tell, but I think they, if the electric cars don't succeed, I think it'll be a big problem for Jaguar.
And many others.
Yeah.
So I think Aston Martin's going that way, Alfa Romeo's going that way. There's a lot of them. And if electric, all of a sudden by 2030, people are going, I'd rather have a 1.4 litre turbo engine with minimal CO2 content or whatever it is, as opposed to electric engine, because we don't actually know how truly tested they are.
Yes, and I mean, there's also huge questions about, I mean, certainly if you've got an electric vehicle, there's no way you can take it as a collectible and park it in your garage, because that battery is going to have to get replaced by every 6 years, even if you try and look after it. So,
Very much so.
They are companies.
I never thought about that.
There's a company in the UK that's making rebuilt E-Type Jaguars as electric.
Yes.
And, they sell for a lot of money, but it's not something that I would go for, but I think they're trying to hedge their bets that they can still have sports cars and they're going to be electric.
But it then gets to the issue that, fantastic, thank you. Here's my E-Type electric. Oh, it's wonderful. Everyone, that's stunning. And then 6 years down the line, that company who might have made it doesn't make it anymore. Now you have to go and find somebody who's got a battery that is compatible, which I'm sure they all will be by then.
Yeah.
But it's an ongoing process as opposed to having a petrol engine classic car where if you don't drive it, you might have to change a couple of tubes that have worn out a little.
Yes.
Quite different.
Very different. And the biggest thing that you're going to have, I mean, even with the petrol cars, the modern cars, is the problem when it comes to all the electronics, the electronic chips. I mean, if you look at the electronics, a component, an IC that's made today, probably is unobtainable in 20 years' time because it's where new technologies come in. So you won't be able to get the electronic components. So it does worry me about all the very modern cars with all the electrics in them.
Phew! Oh, I tell you, I think that's a very interesting way to end it off, Roger. I mean, we could also sit for hours because I think your knowledge on Jaguars and many other cars as well, just by the way, is extraordinary. But it's interesting to see where you have some reservations about where the car industry is going and also where modern cars are. And I think I side on you where something where you can actually work on and tinker on is a very, very good, viable bet.
Yeah, you know what they say with these modern cars, what makes a good mechanic is your typing speed. Because it's all download into your computer, they must identify the faulty component, and it's find and replace. There's not much you can fix.
Mark and swap. Yeah. Roger Martin, thank you for your time. Thank you, really, really appreciate it. Jaguar, and we'll see you again next time. Thanks for joining us.
Ferris Cars is a Ferrari specialist dealership in Sandton, Johannesburg. Since 2010, Ferris Cars has dealt in all things related to Maranello's finest, from classics to the contemporary. Sales, service, advice, and exclusive events, Ferris either has it or has access to it. And of course, in partnership with Altcoin Trader, Ferris Cars accepts cryptocurrency and can even help you buy your dream car from any other dealership in crypto. Check out their website at ferriscars.com or follow them on all popular social media platforms.